these little squares of faces and opportunities to connect in this wonderful way across the region. So as we're getting started, I'm going to invite President Blair to lead us just in a moment of reflection time.
Hello, my beloveds. It's awesome to see you. I love watching you all come in this funny little kind of way in which we connect. And I remember that and the stories we tell. I have three things to offer. One is a Facebook post from my sister. The second is just a kind of a remember of some story and a closing prayer. So first, my sister and I have quite an interesting relationship as we kind of reflect on the church together. She posted this piece on her profile, and I thought, what a great way to open this town hall. So it's a piece by John Riddell, who's a poet, a storyteller, writer, and here's what he writes. And it's a conversation with God. You'll figure out who's who as I read the script. Hey God, hello my love. The world is completely out of control. I know. It's such an adventure, right? No. It's like being on a runaway train. I need to feel like I'm in control. You want to be in control? Yes. You're living on a spinning wet rock of a planet that resides next to a constantly exploding fireball in the middle of an ever-expanding universe that's filled with mysteries beyond your wildest imagination. Okay. And on this planet that you're hurling through the great expanse in, you are cohabitating with billions of other people who have free will and their own experiences that shape their perspectives and beliefs. Yeah. And while all of this is going on, your soul is residing in a physical body that is such a miracle of delicate engineering that at any given moment could produce its last heartbeat. Right. What is it about your existence that you think you have any control of? Come on, you know the answer to this. What can you control? How kind I am to people? Yup, and one other thing.
Yeah, I can hear.
Is it too loud?
No.
How kind you are to yourself. Aside from that, most everything else is a bit outside of your design. Well, that's a bit terrifying. All great adventures are. When John Pentland began to tell the story of what was happening at McDougall United Church in Calgary, one of the things that he used to refer to was that one of the first things they did was a sign that they stuck on the front of the church, and it had words something like, whoever you are, wherever you're at on your journey, or wherever you're at, you're welcome here, or there's a place here for you, or some kind of version like that. And I'll confess that I repeat words like that almost every Sunday when I welcome people into worship. I say things like, whoever you are, wherever you're at on your journey, whatever story you tell, whatever mask you wear, there's a place here for you. And so as I think about that, and I think about the times that we're in, and I think about the announcement from the Public Health Office yesterday, and I think about how weirdly churches are exempt from a lot of stuff, and I think about the kinds of people who make up our communities of faith and congregations in the region, I wonder how we actually live out those words, that radical hospitality of Christ at the table, for example. I wonder how we do that. And it's a living question for us today, isn't it? As we prepare to think about what our return to live worship will look like. How will we welcome people into our places? With that question and with that word kindness, or being kind on our hearts, I'd like to offer this prayer from this prayer based on the words of Ted Loder. Please pray with me. O God of miracles, of galaxies and crocuses and children, we praise you now for the souls of the children within each of us, shy in our awe of you, delighted by our foolishness, stubborn in our wanting, persistent in our questioning, and bold in our asking you to help us unbury our talents for wonder and for humor and for gratitude, so that we may invest them eagerly in the recurring mysteries of spring and beginnings, of willows that weep and rivers that flow, and people who grow in such amazing and often painful ways. May we be forever linked and loyal to justice and joy, simplicity and humanity, Christ and Christ's kingdom, for its presence now and for its presence coming. Amen.
Thank you, Blair.
Pleasure.
Those were wonderful words to get us started together. As we come together and begin to engage our conversation today, I invite you to acknowledge the land that you are on in the chat as you feel called to do so, and appreciate those who have already taken the initiative to do that. And we'll just ask you to do that as we go through, as you wish. So before we get into the kind of main conversation for our time today, I did just want to reiterate a little bit the email that we sent out to you yesterday, just a reminder that the region has been the target of a big fishing expedition yesterday, where there was an email made to look like it came from me, quite legitimate looking Gmail address, asking people for some help that was confidential, and asking to have some further email conversation. And then if people replied to that email, there was a request for money. Hopefully the fact that the request was in Bitcoin tipped everyone off, because I don't even have a clue about Bitcoin and would never ask for that, nor would I ever ask anyone to provide help in that way. So just a warning that some of these schemes are pretty legitimate looking, and that it is easy for even the smartest among us to fall prey to that kind of a scam. And so to be really, really careful, and just recognize that if something sounds a little fishy, it probably is. And you can reach out to me directly using my United Church email address, or to anyone in the office to verify something before you provide that type of assistance. And we'll keep trying to remind people. We're told that the only real defense against this is education, because when it's not actually hacking our system, it's creating a new email that's made to look like me. So we can't do technical controls within our system to address it. So the only thing we can do is educate, and it happens in congregations too. And so we really encourage you to do the same with your congregation. and to know that the United Church is being targeted right now, because it was actually many of my colleagues, executive ministers, had the same thing happen in their regions yesterday. So it was definitely targeted directly to the United Church. So just wanted to put that out there. Second thing, just so that I'm not distracting, just to let you all know that I'm not saying no to everything that's being said, but I do have a bit of a tremor going on, and I'm doing the things I need to do to get that looked at. And so I just didn't want people wondering or feeling distracted by that. So I thought I would mention that as we begin our time together. And the purpose of us coming together is there's been lots of activity around the COVID things these days, and it just felt like leaving it into September was a bit too long. And so we decided that it would be a good idea to come together, not with any particular formal agenda today, but really just for you to have the opportunity to hear from one another and to hear from the region in terms of what we're going to be recommending, and also for us to hear from you what would be helpful to support you as you go back into the fall. So that's the main thing that we're about today. You will hear that if you haven't already, that there was an email sent out to many faith leaders just with an update on the requirements for faith communities. So what is kind of going on there is that I think in many ways, COVID has become a bit of a political issue as much as it has a health issue. And one of the issues around it that is politicized is around placing restrictions on faith communities and what would be considered a restriction of one's access to religion or the freedom of religion. And so you will find that the increased requirements that have been made are actually not being applied to faith communities. So the required vaccination passports for many indoor activities are not being applied to faith communities because it's not seen as a discretionary service, or to flip that over, it's seen as an essential service. So therefore, they're not requiring that. Secondly, the same is true for the mask mandate that has just come into place. So there is no requirement that masks be worn in church for worship services. Having said that, the region is going to recommend that masks be worn indoors because it's our belief that COVID is equally as transmissible in churches as it is in grocery stores and restaurants. And so we feel it doesn't make sense to have a mask requirement everywhere else and not in church. And we don't feel that that hinders people's access to church by having a mask requirement in place. So we're going to encourage communities of faith to have a mask requirement in place, and specifically, especially for when people are singing, because we do recognize that singing is still considered a high risk activity. And so we want to do what we can to minimize that. I know that planning for fall worship to a large extent feels a little bit like this. You know, it is a moving target, and we've got a good plan in place, and then something is coming along and making those plans very difficult to make. But I think that we have had really good information about how to minimize transmission, and that really needs to be what our practices ought to be going forward. The main things that we're going to be recommending are that we have the mask requirements, that we continue to social distance as much as possible. We're going to suggest that we continue with single serve communion If you can do that in a number of different ways. One way is to purchase the little individual cups and wafers and give them out as people come in. Another way is to have people come forward and receive from a cup and be served bread. So there's a number of different creative ways. I know one community of faith is giving people grapes and pita bread or a cracker in a little Ziploc bag as they arrive. So there's lots of different creative ways, but we really are encouraging not passing things among people, and recognizing that intinction or sharing a common cup are very risky in terms of disease spread, and it's pretty impossible to ensure that fingers don't end up in the wine or grape juice when we're doing intinction. So that's going to be one of the things that we put out in our updated recommendations. Also encouraging some donation means other than passing of an offering plate along rows. So either having a donation opportunity at the doors as people are coming, or at the entrance to the sanctuary, as well as offering online donation opportunities. That would be really good. Another thing that we're going to be recommending is that, and I think this is probably the most important thing that we're going to suggest, is strong recommendation / requirement for people to stay home when they're unwell, including your staff. And this is really critical. I think this is such a key component to us being able to keep our people well. And I think that's a message that kind of goes against a lot of how we function as people. You know, we're designed to kind of power through things and to push through even when we're not well. And that's a message that we do need to shift, because we need to consider virus transmission in general, not just COVID, and just trying to keep our people healthy as much as possible needs to be a really important priority. The other way that we can encourage that is by offering online opportunities. So either doing that as a hybrid with your own service, so either live streaming or Zooming your service. But if you don't have the capacity to do that, setting aside that fear of a neighboring congregation taking your people and encouraging them to attend where they can really be fed through worship, even if it isn't your own place of worship, when they're not able to attend with you in person. So really encouraging people to take advantage of those online offerings if you can't offer them yourself, and if you can't attend in person. We will also be providing some additional guidelines around how to support First Third ministries in your community of faith in terms of social distancing, but they will basically be following along the same guidelines as what we've suggested here, which will be masking and maintaining good social distance. So those are the main points that I'm planning to put into the upcoming communication. I'm just wondering if people have questions, if there are areas that we've missed, and if there are things that would be helpful. One of the things. Just looking at the chat, but if somebody has a question, either raise your hand, or if you want to make a comment, and I'm just going to look at the questions here in the chat to get caught up. So can we require masks and enforce it, or do we have to encourage? So you can say it's a requirement, and I encourage you to do so, but you'll have to make your own decisions about how to enforce it if someone actually shows up without wearing a mask, because it is a difficult thing. So So you can require it, but you also have to figure out what you're going to do in the situation where somebody doesn't choose to honor that. You know, there will also be people who can't wear masks for medical reasons and so on. And if enough other people are wearing masks and, you know, hopefully the majority of people will be vaccinated, you know, having one or two people in the sanctuary without masks will probably not be hugely problematic. So which set of guidelines are applicable for which activities? Thank you, Sandra, that's a good question. So the vaccine passport actually is applicable to anything that is not considered to be non-discretionary or essential. So church board meetings and things like that, all of those things will still be considered to be required to comply with the vaccination passports. So the only thing that we're exempt from where that's concerned is actual worship activity. Okay, so if you're having meetings or if you're bored, those kinds of things, everybody attending those must be masked and must be double vaccinated. And you're required to do that as anybody else for any other gathering where that's applicable. That was not and is not in the actual guidelines for faith leaders, but it was in the email, the body of the email that was sent along with that guideline as a clarification. Things like AA meetings and other things that are part of your ministry that are considered essential, then the guidelines don't apply. So so the term is what's considered essential and non-essential. So we've effectively, worship services have been now somehow qualified as essential. Ross, you want to go ahead?
Okay, thank you. A comment and a question. You were mentioning how your personal account there was a phishing attack. Trinity United Church in Port Coquitlam, the minister himself went through quite a phase with a virus attack. Luckily, he is not connected specifically because we don't have like an in-house server, but rather do a company off-site. So it didn't affect us. It affected him directly. But again, it was the same type of thing that you happened to yourself, Trina. The other one is more of a question to Mauricio. Is there somewhere in the PMRC pages to help churches go through the process of hybrid planning? We actually reached out to several companies. I think it was 6 or 7. We got one response, and it's not all that positive. Is there a kind of guidelines that Mauricio or somebody could send out to us? This is what to look for. This is what you should be trying to do.
So Leadership has been putting on a bunch of workshops on this topic, and I think those have been recorded. So I would encourage you to access those for those kinds of guidelines. But Andrea Irwin is working with Leadership, and she is the person to speak to about support with hybrid implementation of hybrid worship in your context. So she can be reached through our staff directory at the region. Next question, social distancing, does that mean continued size restrictions? So technically there's no size restrictions for worship in the church. So, so technically no. And we're recommending that you continue to do social distancing as much as possible. That'll have to be an internal decision within your community of faith as to what is, what you feel is safe within your particular context. But there isn't a number that you'll have to manage or anything. It's really just what feels like it's safe. For something like a wedding, you know, because it's not considered an essential service, you could also require everyone that attended to show the vaccine passport, because it's a gathering. It might even be required. I haven't checked that, but that would be another approach as well, for things like weddings. Blair.
Those were my questions, Trina. So weddings, funerals, things like jazz vespers, they're not considered essential services and therefore are required to be double vaxxed and masked.
Funerals and jazz vespers would be fine because they're considered worship services. And wedding, the ceremony itself is considered a worship service, but anything else connected with the wedding isn't.
Okay, so then another follow-up. So any spiritual event like a Bible study or a labyrinth walk or a study group or a cooking group are not considered essential and therefore require their indoor activities like everything else.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, the way that it was worded, I'll give you the exact wording. Was just have to get it open. Discretionary meetings taking place at places of worship will be subject to proof of vaccination requirements. Non-discretionary meetings such as AA, NA, and other support groups are exempt. So basically anything that's not an actual worship service and not a support service like AA will have to have the vaccine passport in place.
And that includes our renters as well. If they're anybody who's using the building for any of those kinds of activities.
So yeah, but renters can police themselves. You just need to tell them that they have to comply with the rules, but you don't have to police it because that's the provincial health authority's job to police it.
Right.
Yeah.
As an essential service, this is my last question. As an essential service, providing an essential service and the whole body requiring, can you speak about the requirement of staff being vaccinated?
Mm-hmm. So I actually think that's a bit of an evolving question in the moment. The National Church has come out and said that there can be no mandatory requirement for vaccination for staff, but I know that they're looking at that. And as the provincial legislations around this unfold, then there may be different direction provided around that. But in the moment, they're saying that we shouldn't make that a condition of employment, but that you can require masks and things like that in the workplace. So, but as I say, I do kind of expect that could change. How's that for certainty? I kind of expect that it could, that it could change going forward. But at the moment, the lawyers are pretty clear that we can't go down that road.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't think we'll ever go down that road for worship services. That it won't ever be required for worship services to be vaccinated, but I think it could happen around staff. Michael, did that answer your question about vaccine passports?
Yes, it did, Trina. Thank you.
Thank you. Question about singing. So singing, again, is not restricted according to the provincial regulations. I mean, what I want to say about these provincial regulations is that they're the minimum standard, right? So you can always have a higher standard than what the minimum is. So the minimum is that there aren't restrictions on a lot of these things. But we also know over the last little while what has been recommended by our provincial health officer. And so we know what she wants us to do to be safe. And so you have to kind of combine that with a little bit of common sense to come up with what you want to do in your community of faith, and you know, make your decisions accordingly. you know, at this point, she's not restricting worship. She is not restricting, you know, requiring masks, but that doesn't mean she doesn't think it's a good idea for us to require masks. It just means that she's recognizing, well, it means she's giving into some political pressure. So, so, you know, again, just recognize them as minimum standards. So I think I've answered some of these.
There was a question about safe workplaces, Trina.
Yeah, I'm just working my way down these
the
chats. So 12-step groups, the mask mandate not applying to them. Yeah, I think again, you can put up signs and say that you want everyone in the building to be masked. Again, it's an enforcement question, but certainly you can request it, even recommend it, even say you require it. But it's an enforcement challenge. And I don't think they're expressly exempt from the mask mandate. They are from the vaccine passport, but I think you could just interpret it that they're not exempt and tell them that it's required. Again, with singing, Nancy's question about choirs, there aren't restrictions, but Dr. Henry says that it's a high risk activity. She still recommends, you know, the 2-meter distance for singing. She still says soloists are better than congregational singing. That having good ventilation in the area where singing takes place makes a difference. But I think whatever you do with singing, it's just wise to do it masked, because it's just going to reduce the risk in the short term. Question about buffets for funerals. So I would just recommend that we not do buffets for funerals. You know, we're not really equipped to do the management of COVID protocols. And if you need to do food service, I would suggest that you do single serve, the same as we do for everything else, as far as COVID protocols. Or bring in a caterer, and then it becomes their responsibility to manage the safety of that. But I would just say don't do that. You know, do a plated meal or do single serve servings. Question about coffee hour. I think that again, there's no restrictions around coffee hour, but I would recommend using single serve items. So if you're going to have food, have granola bars or, you know, banana bread in a baggie, rather than having people go up and take things off of a plate that numerous people will be grabbing. The other thing that Dr. Henry says fairly regularly in the meetings is that the length of the time you're together makes a difference. And so, you know, she does kind of recommend shorter gatherings. So, you know, it may be wise to not do coffee hour just yet, to wait and see what the fall looks like before you actually bring that back, and you know, bring people back for worship, and keep the time a little more constrained by not adding that coffee time on at the end of the service. Do that as a step one, and then, you know, have the coffee hour as a later step in the process of reopening our buildings. Question about whether masks can be removed once people are sitting down. I think that depends how close together people are. So if you've got people well socially distanced and not directly in front of each other, then probably when they're sitting down, taking the masks off, as long as they're not breathing on each other from behind, it's probably fine to take their masks off. I think that really comes down to how the seats are distributed in the sanctuary. Definitely encourage people. You can encourage people who are not vaccinated to worship online. It is okay to encourage people to be vaccinated. It is okay to suggest that if they're not, that it's best not to put other people at risk by coming to an in-person gathering. I would suggest you be careful about how you word that, more as a suggestion or a possibility as opposed to a requirement, because you don't want to give anybody the sense that they've been banned from worship. The board does have the authority around these decisions. So we're making recommendations as a region, but these decisions need to be made by the board. There isn't a requirement for contact tracing, but you know, if we do have an outbreak, I'm sure you're going to want to communicate with people. You can do it or not, but there is no requirement at this point for contact tracing. Even restaurants aren't doing that anymore. So there won't be any big formal contact tracing process the way there used to be. So it may just be a bit of an exercise in frustration at this point. Heidi, I don't see anything that contravenes in your comment that contravenes the rules. So I think that's okay. Yeah, Jim's just talking about the potential for conflict if someone refuses to wear a mask. That's why we're kind of, you know, you have to think about the language. I think strongly recommend. You can say require, but I wouldn't get into a fight with someone. You know, if 99% of the people are masked, I think one person not being masked is probably okay.
Trina, can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Because
sorry, I didn't see that hand up.
Sorry. So several of our folks have said they want to come back to church. They're double vaxxed. They are being very careful in their personal lives to not go to places where people are not vaccinated. And they ask the questions before they engage in activities with people. So they've said they long to come back to worship, but they will only do so if we can assure them that worship will be with other fully vaccinated people.
Yeah, we can't assure that.
So can an individual congregation have a policy, make a policy, could the board make a policy that for people coming to in-person worship that they would be fully vaccinated, and that for those who aren't fully vaccinated that they would participate in the online?
I wouldn't suggest you make it a policy. I would suggest you make it a recommendation that that's what you would like people to do. But if you make it a policy, you would be asking to see vaccine passports, and it is expressly put in the public health order that we're exempt. And so anybody could just say, I don't want to show it to you, and you would have no recourse. So I think you'd be setting up expectations that would be unrealistic. So I think that, and you'd also set yourself up for a bit of a lawsuit. So I would suggest that you tell people, this is our preference, is that if you're not vaccinated, that you worship online. But I don't think you can guarantee anybody that if they were to be in the space, that there would only be fully vaccinated people there.
Huh. I remember when I found out we weren't an essential service, I thought to myself, my nose is a little bit out of joint, because I thought we were really important. And,
and now you're annoyed the other direction. I love it. Yeah. Okay, Jay, I see your hand. I'm just going to work through a bit more in the chat, and then I'll come to you. So questions about cleaning. We're still encouraging all of the cleaning and hand care protocols that we put in place before. You know, like, I think the whole cleaning thing, the danger with this virus is more aerosol in nature than the touch transmission now. And so the cleaning of high touch surfaces is still important, and we do still want to avoid, you know, passing things beyond each other. And we still do encourage the cleaning and disinfecting, but the focus, I think, is more on the masking at this stage. The interior health restriction to 50 people does not apply to worship communities. So worship still has no restrictions on the size in the interior health region. But we are still suggesting requiring masks and only singing with masks or not at all, especially in the interior health region, because the numbers are so high there. Jay.
Yeah, thanks, Trina. I guess my question related to Cheryl's, and Cheryl, thank you for raising it, because unfortunately my COVID exhaustion is showing up in being exhausted by trying to accommodate some people, not everyone, some who are choosing their own behaviors over the safety of others, to be quite frank about it. So if we can't mandate masks, and we can't mandate vaccine passports, first of all, that's going to exclude a number of vulnerable people who are already telling me that they can't come because they're too vulnerable. But what about when we screen people at the door and ask if they're sick and it's obvious that they are? Can we then say, no, you can't come in? I mean, I get the complication, and I get that I'm not gracious like Jesus. But, you know, for me, that's the frustration at this point. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think a lot of us are. When I watch business leaders breathe a sigh of relief because finally the government says, oh yeah, by the way, you can say no now. So I'm trying to figure out how to navigate this in a way that honors people's rights, but quite frankly, errs on the side of the vulnerable ones who are the ones who come most consistently. I'll stop preaching now.
You can say what you want, right? I mean, you can say these are this is what we're asking of people. We're asking you not to come if you're not vaccinated. We're asking, you can do all those things. You just don't want to put yourself in a position where you have to turn someone away at the door and have a big fight. If somebody's sick, then you can certainly say, look, you're not well, you can't be here, you're going to spread this around. If they don't leave, then you put them in a corner far away from everywhere else, and maybe that's what you do if somebody's not wearing a mask as well, as you isolate them. But you know what we're talking about is best practices, and you know, Michelle points out in her comment that faith leaders are supported to implement these additional members in their in-person service should they desire to do so. Dr. Henry said, just make it a requirement for people to be vaccinated, but the lawyers are telling us something different, right? And so, you know, we're also kind of balancing what we can do without putting ourselves at risk versus you know, the good of the whole. So there does need to be a little bit of kind of management of that, and I feel like you know, I don't want to spend too much time going round and around that, because it's not something that we have a lot of control over. All we can do is put out our policies, communicate those policies, ask people to comply, and then sort of respond on a case-by-case basis. But I also don't want to see you doing things that put you and your community of faith at legal risk.
Yep.
Jim?
Trina, why have the church lawyers said that an individual congregation cannot require proof of vaccine?
That's just, they didn't actually tell us why. They just said we can't. I think, well, that's not true. It is because of people's right to privacy and their access to their individual right to access to freedom of religion or whatever, and that those individual rights supersede, you know, the church's right to be able to ask someone for proof of vaccination. Now, the fact that the provinces are requiring proof of vaccination in so many other things is going to challenge that. And so it is possible that our legal people, I mean, COVID, everything has been changing all through this, right? So we get some guidance one week and then it changes the next week. It's quite possible that the lawyers will come up with a different position, you know, when they get back from summer holidays. But at the moment, this is the position that they've taken, and it's based on the privacy issue. And it's so different across the country. And because it's a national denomination, like in Alberta, for example, there's not going to be a vaccine passport. And so, you know, there's things, so the national church is also dealing with those kind of provincial variations as well. And their policies have to be across the country. Michelle's asking about thrift store.
Can I just supplementary that question?
Yep, for sure.
So to me, I'm thinking I want to see from a lawyer representing the United Church of Canada the exact reason why we can't do this, because we're going to just float around this thing forever and a day if we all get grotty about it. And unlike Jesus, and you know, 3 weeks from now our lawyers say, oh no, we've rethought it, you can go ahead and do that. Like, now is the time we need the clarification. And I personally do not see, if the rest of society is going to require vaccine passport, why church can't. And so that's my frustration with trying to make a decision without clear written legal guidance.
Well, in this situation, we can't, because the government has said we don't I mean, it isn't actually just the church that's saying that, because there was that exclusion in the health order, that actually puts us, makes it very difficult for us to do anything that contradicts that. I'm just putting the national policy there as a file that you can download. It's a 4-page Word document that actually goes through their position on this. So it's also about you know, access, equal access, and so on. Now I just have to get back to where I was on the questions. Michelle was asking about thrift store volunteers. So what we've been saying all along around thrift stores is that they need to follow the retail store guidelines. So if you go on the WorkSafe and the websites around providing guidance around retail, you can follow those guidelines. And as you can see, there is a bit of a variation between worship activities and other church activities. So this would fall under an other church activity, as in it's not a discretionary service. So you can then require the same things that the province is requiring around vaccine and masking and social distancing and all those things. Are we supporting the vaccine passports? Yes, we're supporting them. And we certainly didn't ask for them not to apply to us. So that would have been fine. But that's not how it came out. And it's actually not, they didn't consult with faith leaders about it that I'm aware of. So I was surprised that we were left off, and I was very surprised, like shocked, that we were excluded from the mandatory mask mandate, because I just don't see how that, you know, doesn't, it denies people access to religion. So I don't know where that came from. to be honest, in any of the it was very inconsistent with anything Dr. Henry said in any of the meetings that we had. The last meeting I had with her though was like 6 weeks ago, mid-July. So there hasn't, well, I guess, yeah, about 6 weeks ago. And so since the Delta variant kicked up, there hasn't been a subsequent meeting, so. If I haven't got to your question, I'm still scrolling through, but feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. I'm seeing quite a few repeats here now. Yes, WorkSafe requirements do apply. So with respect to any employees, you have to make sure you're in compliance with WorkSafe. And as I've said previously, they're shifting from kind of COVID protocols to contagious disease protocols that are, you know, now going to be applicable for, you know, just general virus spread reduction in workplaces. So those protocols that WorkSafe has put in place now are intended to be long-term protocols that we will follow. So they're not intended to be pandemic protocols. So we can expect those WorkSafe protocols to continue. And you'll know that you have to have a plan for WorkSafe for contagious disease prevention. So you have to make sure that you have that in place anyway in order to meet your WorkSafe obligations. We'll get an updated document out to you in the next few days after today. Dave Moores, yes, the vaccine passport rules do apply in the case of small meetings and council meetings. You did not hear that wrong. Choir's planning to meet with distancing and masks. Doors and windows will be open. That's fine. A soloist who says they can't sing without a mask on, then you have to have them appropriately distanced. So yeah, and if you could put like one of those plexiglass barriers between them and the congregation, that would be even better. But just a good amount of distance if there's no mask on. I think a little more than the standard social distancing. Eleanor?
Thanks, Trina. We've had a request to resume Healing Touch in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know how that is going to be impacted by the new mask mandate, but at the moment that, you know, technically that's allowed. I don't, you know, it's a wisdom question, right? Like is it necessary? But I would say for Healing Touch that you probably would want to require vaccination. And you know, you could consider that a non-essential service, therefore applicable to the vaccine passport, and require the vaccine passport for that.
Thanks, Trina. And just one comment. I'm wondering if you could put in your introduction to your directive. I think a lot of people feel that if they're double vaccinated, they're safe. Right. But everyone who's double vaccinated is safe. They are not. Double vaccination does not prevent you from getting COVID. It may prevent you from getting seriously ill, ending up in a hospital and an ICU. But if you look at the average age of our congregant, it may prevent a 30-year-old or a 35-year-old from ending up in those circumstances. It may not necessarily do that for an older person. So I think we have to try to get people to keep it in perspective that just because you're double vaxxed doesn't mean you're safe, and especially with a variant like the Delta.
Well, plus you can be a carrier, right? Yes. Which is also, you know, not get sick, not have any symptoms, but but spread it around. So those things are important. Joyce, my apologies. I try really hard not to do shorthand, but sometimes it slips through. So yes, board is the governing body of the congregation, whatever you call it, council, session, board, anything like that. So yes, and please do ask those clarifications, because sometimes they slip through. Peter.
Thanks, Trina. Boy, I'm feeling blessed that you are so on top of all of this information, but my brain can only handle a few things. And so let me see if I've got this right. I'm tending to group what's essential. The mask mandate and the vaccine passport does not apply, correct?
Right.
And what's non-essential, the mask mandate and vaccine passport does apply, correct?
Correct.
So what's essential is worship, and that's kind of a little elastic, but the sacraments are in there somewhere. So that portion of a wedding might be exempt, right? Be
so
essential.
like a worship service is how you have to think about it. So if it's a worship service, so the wedding is the wedding service is a worship service. A funeral is a worship service. Jazz Vespers is a worship service. It's not about when it's held, like it's not Sunday morning or whatever, but it's a worship service.
Right. And then the non-essential, which is actually quite a bit of stuff, right? So it might be any small group gathering, a meeting, study.
Anything else, basically.
Any mission, ministry, storefront.
Yeah.
And it's not really a choice we have, but those two requirements, those new requirements apply, correct?
We fall under the provincial mandate. Yeah.
Okay.
For public gatherings. So it's a question like, so if it, for Healing Touch, it's only 1 or 2 people. So that might be a loose application of it, but I would just go ahead and do it anyway. But yeah, I would say we're not exempt from it for any other activities except for the actual worship, the actual act of worship. And I know then people are going to say, well, Bible studies, worship, but we're not going to go there. We're just going to talk about worship services.
Thanks, Trina.
So Sandra's just saying about masks. I think I've answered that, Sandra. If I haven't, can you come back online?
Hi, Trina. We did have one question about wind instruments, brass, that kind of thing.
So they're specifically mentioned in the guidelines for faith leaders that you can use them in the context of worship. But again, it's a social distancing protocols. For those of you who know or don't know, of course, my son's a bagpiper. So this is a big question for the Simon Fraser University Pipe Band. Well, can we come back to practice in the fall? And we've been told we can. We just need to have social distancing in the room. And there, of course, ventilation is the question because they practice up at the SFU campus. So, wind instruments are the same. I think you just, as much distance as you can get between them and the people is better, but they are allowed. And Robin, to be clear, there is no 50-person restriction on worship in the interior. We are specifically excluded from that requirement in the interior. Again, whether that's wise or not, it's another question, but it is the case. I'm just reading through the questions here, just bear with me. Some of them are comments, so I'm not reading those out. So feel free to flip through those yourselves. Jim's commenting that we weren't seen as essential service in the initial shutdown, but now we are. I think it's not I mean, they're using the term discretionary and non-discretionary, not really essential. It was me that used that term, but I think what it is about more. It's more about the access to religion. They must have been spooked by the lawsuit, and so a lot of this is in reaction to that, I think. So it's not so much that they consider us essential. It's about the basic, violation of one's right to religious freedom that they're playing with. So that's what this response is about. Janet.
Yeah, thanks. I'm a little bit confused about church choirs. When we're rehearsing, we're not worship. So does that require vaccination? And what happens when we sing in a worship service? Is that different, or is there some consistency there?
No, it's no different. Like, you just need to follow those guidelines wherever choirs are, whether they're practicing or whether they're singing in a service. That's the same. So Michelle asked whether you can require vaccination for children, youth volunteer leaders. If they're leading small groups, I would think that qualifies in with the provincial vaccine passport requirements. So I think you can, but again, like it's a bit of thin ice because, volunteers, there's not really any big difference between volunteers and employees in terms of the law. So you do have to be careful around that. And so I would be inclined to encourage rather than require. Yeah, Sheila's commenting about concern around mental health playing a role. I think you're right. Dr. Henry is very concerned about the impact on people, especially young people. Anytime she talks about it, she gets really emotional when she talks about the toll this has taken on young people. So she's very, very aware of the price that people have paid to follow the the guidelines. But yeah, and to your point, Louise, some of the why behind these things is speculation. I mean, it's a bit of informed speculation because I've been in numerous conversations with her and I know what she thinks. And when it varies from what she does, it's because of some form of political pressure. But yes, it is somewhat speculation. Dave.
I'm sorry, Trina. Janet asked a question about choir practice, and I didn't. The answer didn't seem straightforward. So I'll ask again and see if I can get it in my brain right.
Okay,
if
sorry.
If a choir is at practice on a Tuesday night, are they a small group gathering that requires vaccination proof?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I misunderstood the question. That's a good question. I don't think that there is a clear guideline around that, but I think the board could interpret that.
Like it seems like small group.
It seems like it's a small group. So I would say I would say you could require proof of vaccination for that under the provincial protocols.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, no, thank you. Sorry, I lost the plot on that one. Nancy. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I was just saying thanks, Trina, and thanks, Dave, because that was a choir question was running around in my head too. So Michelle and I are saying some things in the chat about thrift shop volunteers, and so I now feel like I've heard two different things in relationship to thrift shop volunteers or volunteers in general. So I'm trying to determine whether or not we need to have our thrift shop volunteers who come in to sort right during the week, if we need to or even sell in the shop, if we need to require them to be vaccinated. And then when I was just listening to you, so I think I thought the answer to that was yes. And then when I'm hearing you respond to the question about requiring a children or youth leader, a volunteer with them, that would run into that sort of gray area about requiring or not requiring kind of employee kind of people. So anyway.
I think the way we want to think about this is if it's a small group. So if people are coming together in a small group for something in the church, that would be something that you could use the vaccine protocol for. But for just worship, then no. And just because they're staff, no. But if it's a small group, then I mean it's kind of getting around the fact that you can't require employees to a certain extent, because if you're going to become part of a small group, you have to be vaccinated to be part of that small group. Then then that would apply to staff according to the provincial mandate, right? So it is a bit of a backdoor.
How does that play itself out if, like in retail settings, I'm assuming that my grocery store clerk does not have to be vaccinated in order to work in the store. So therefore, then I go to, nor do my volunteers if they are sorting and stacking as they would be in a grocery store.
Right, because they're not meeting in a group. Right.
They're not really meeting in a group. They might be in a room. There might be 8 of them in a room together working.
But they're not meeting in a group. So if they're meeting in a group, and you might decide that a group of volunteers coming together in your thrift shop to sort stuff
is a group.
And so then you can decide that. But a retail setting where the grocery store, that's not a group. That's individuals coming in. There's individuals working on the shelves it's not a meeting like where they're coming together. So I think you need to think of it like that. It's a gathering or a group as opposed to individuals coming in to do tasks.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. So you can interpret that either way as you wish.
Okay. I will be telling my council that this evening. Good luck with that, folks. Okay, thanks.
So I was just reading the guidelines which you sent out today, or August 24th date, and it says the barriers and physical distancing. And then the last bit is, for the next 6 months, participants can be limited to those who are fully vaccinated.
Yeah, but again, all of the things that we just talked about apply around privacy and enforcement and all of those kinds of things. So, but I think if you want to require proof of vaccination, you just call choir practice a small group and the provincial guidelines apply, right?
Okay, thank you.
Worry about people bunching up, coming and going from the church. So, the only suggestions are to have people come and go through different doors. But really it's just a matter of trying to keep people moving and reminders. You might want to have greeters that, encourage people along. So those are options. John is questioning coffee hours as not as in a purely technical sense are outside of the act of worship. They are, but they're expressly allowed in the faith gathering guidelines. So again, it's not all that consistent either. I'm aware of that.
Yeah, I have a question, Joshua.
Yes, go ahead, Joshua.
Yeah, sorry, I'm late. I just finished the Bible study. There are 2 messages. One is provincial. The new guideline says that we are exempt. Churches are exempt from the masking, but the interior health the guideline has different messages. So which one is the correct one?
So the guidelines are provincial. So the BC guidelines apply in BC and the Ontario ones for Ontario. But what we said at the beginning of this town hall was that we will be recommending people wear masks for worship.
Okay.
Yeah. So while we're technically exempt, we're asking people to wear them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are people who are requiring employees to be vaccinated.
So like technically, we are not exempted. Like that's what some of our church members are saying, like because that the new document that you have provided says that's provincial, but Interior, BC Interior has
the Interior, sorry.
Yeah, Interior has not changed the mask mandatory message. Yeah.
So in the Interior, there are in BC Interior health region, there are different guidelines that are in place because they're a COVID hotspot at the moment, but we are exempt from those requirements. So there is no group cap on gatherings in the Interior health region, but we are still saying masks must be worn, and that especially during singing, masks should be worn, or no singing at all using soloists. Also, Jonathan noted that for back to the wind instrument question, that there are covers for the wind instruments that can be used to reduce transmission of aerosol as well.
What about the preachers, the speakers?
If you are distanced enough from your people, you don't need to wear a mask. But you have to be, more than the standard 2 meter distance. So it's good to have be a little further away than just the standard one.
Trina, I was wanting you to comment on.
Thank you.
I was wanting you to comment on the Sunday school issue and children in church.
So I haven't done any consultation with the First Third team yet on that. So I don't want to go in too much detail about that until I talk to them. But the short version will be that we would be requiring masks and the similar protocols that we've talked about here, social distancing as much as possible, and all of those things. What I suspect we will do is try to keep it as close to what's going on in schools as we can. And then individual churches obviously will need to decide whether or not they have the capacity to safely run a children ministry program. But we'll come out with something more in detail in writing.
When?
We'll be producing a document in the next few days.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Are you making a statement with your mask, Janice? Okay, the questions are coming faster than I can respond to them here. So if I've not got to yours, I'm still trying to go through them, but feel free to unmute yourself and just ask.
Trina, Dave Cass from Knox Church. I'm getting some comment about ventilation. And when I asked some people that should know something, they started talking about air changes per hour. But in a church that doesn't have a mechanical ventilating system, how do we assess that? And has the province advised you in any way regarding this type of thing?
Sorry, can you ask that again?
I'm getting some question about, do we have good ventilation?
Okay, that's what I thought. No, they haven't. All they ever say is good ventilation. So they've not given any guideline around what that looks like at all.
Do we as the church have any suggestions?
We have not dove deeply into that, no. And I think, you know, it's a challenge because, you know, there's no way that we could retrofit our old church buildings with some expensive ventilation system. So what we're really talking about is paying attention to the social distancing and masking and those things more, the hand washing protocols, all of those things, and then, you know, keeping the windows open where that makes sense. And, you know, just using some common sense, as in not crowding people into a building, you know, those kinds of things. So we haven't done too much with that, and I don't really expect that we will, at least not regionally.
Thank you.
Ross.
Yes, follow up on Trina's. What we read into the instructions that came from the BC CDC group is that if you already have a ventilation system in place for your church, it must be operating up to its original intent. It's never meant to us rush out and buy whole new systems, realizing how expensive they are. And so that's what we did at Trinity United Chaparco-Quitlam. We had a professional group come in to make sure everything was running to its initial intent. And so we feel that we've done our duty.
Yeah, I think so. And you know, we can get carried away here too, right? I really think that there isn't, I mean, I guess the difference is that we're gathering in person than from before, where we were recommending not to gather. And we are saying, if you feel it's safe to gather, you can gather following these protocols. But the protocols themselves are not that different from what we were doing before. And really just encouraging people to kind of keep this in perspective and just do your best. You know, we can't, you know, we can't be perfect. We can just do the best that we can and put our efforts out, follow the policies, and then go from there. So what I'm going to do is, you know, I've heard, you know, a lot of your questions. We'll do our best to provide some clarification in writing in the next few days. Tressa's been here paying attention to this, and between us, we'll craft something and get it out to you as quickly as we can. But in the meantime, there is the guidelines from the provincial government around faith communities. There's the work safe documents. And, you know, I'll just advise you to pay attention to those. And if you've got individual questions, you can certainly reach out to me either by phone or email. You know, are many of you opening, or are folks continue thinking of not opening? Are there any of you who are not opening, I guess, is probably the better question. So Brecken?
Brecken, yes, we don't have a church at the moment. So we've been worshiping online since March of 2020, and we're going to carry on, I think, and do that. Where we met before at a funeral home, they're not willing to have us back yet.
Oh, well, that makes an easy decision.
So then I think we'll just stay online. It's hard because there's people we're missing, but it's also, there's people we're getting that we didn't ever have before as well.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. That's true. So it sounds like most of you are planning to open, and of course you'll have to be ready to close again if it becomes necessary. But you know, even if you can gather for a few weeks, I'm sure it will be good for people and for their souls to have that opportunity to come together. Yeah, lots of people are sharing what they've been doing. So feel free to continue to do that. Are there any last minute questions, or why don't we do this? Blair, why don't you close our prayer time, and then I'll stay online afterwards if people have, you know, remaining questions, but we'll officially close the session and then go from there.
Trina, thank you. Let me speak on behalf of all of us as we acknowledge and celebrate how well led we are with, I think somebody said a couple of weeks ago, you are our Bonnie Henry. I'm very grateful for the level of expertise and the level of calm that you bring to the answering of the questions and your non-anxious presence. I'm very grateful that you hold it all with such a profound respect for people's genuine concern. So it's in that spirit. So I please hear our gratitude with wide open hearts. I'd like to close with a prayer you've heard me offer before. I think it's critical that we not act in fear, because we'll give ourselves over to the perils of our own worst behavior. Our only response is love. Our only response is to invoke God's agency in a manner that's consistent with our faith. And in that, I invite us to pray. There are only two feelings, love and fear. There are only two languages, love and fear. There are only two activities, love and fear. There are only two motives, two procedures, two frameworks, two results, love and fear. We hold the choice in our hands, O God, and we pray that we are empowered by your Spirit that transforms. May love be our response. May love be your words. May love be your silence. May love hold your boundaries. May love ignite your joy. It's in Christ's name that we pray. It's in Christ's name that we gather. It's in Christ's name that we proclaim transformation for ourselves and for the world. Be kind, my dear friends. Be kind with yourselves and be kind with one another. Go in peace. Amen.
So thank you, everyone. I will hang out here and respond to any questions or conversation that folks want to have. I don't need to rush off today. So if you have things, feel free to hang out with me. But otherwise, thank you very much for coming, and blessings on the rest of your day and the rest of your summer. Jay, you had your hand up?
Yeah, you were asking if people are opening up again. And presently I'm serving 2 small communities of faith that I have never met with in person. So, you know, this is the first go round for us to be in person. And really, we're probably going to open on the 12th of September. And to be honest, I'm a bit concerned about it because of the vulnerable nature of our communities. And just to confess, you know, it's kind of frustrating when I'm hearing people still say, well, you know, I can go to the bar, I can go to the grocery store, whatever, but I can't go to church. Well, now we can go to church, but I think why I'm feeling so passionate about it is all of sorting out a faithful response in light of these restrictions and recommendations runs headlong into what is emerging as probably the mission or missions of these 2 communities of faith. And it's not going to be easy to resolve any more than it is for anybody else. But, you know, I've been reminded more times than once that, you know, Jay, there are people who can't be vaccinated. Well, you know, I'm a reasonably thoughtful person and I am aware of that. So it's just trying to figure out what is the really faithful response here? And I'm not sure any of us really know the answer to that, except one step ahead and try to keep some focus. So, and I'm aware too that I'm not the only one who's feeling tired in all of this. So I would imagine everybody on this call is experiencing their own COVID exhaustion, and that's not making these decisions easy either. So at any rate, thank you for sorting through all of this stuff. I'm no more clear than when I began, but it's nice to know I'm in the same storm as the rest of you.
I think there's COVID exhaustion. There's also a fair amount of grief around the fact that we're here now, you know, when we thought we would be so much further along, and that we actually have to even be having this conversation now, I think is really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, and you know, for many of us now, do we go ahead and actually cancel the funeral plans that we've made? Or do we, you know, nothing's straightforward, and I'm no exception. I'm not any more special than anybody else. No, everybody's going through it, but I think it's okay to be annoyed and angry for the wrong reasons why we're here. Yeah. And I'll stop there.
Thanks. Carol?
Okay. Hi, Trina. Thank you. I'm asking this question. I did come a little bit late, and so it might have been answered. But at one time, I felt there was some hesitancy about asking people if they had been vaccinated. And so I'm wondering if there's any kind of ruling or even suggestions about, do we have the right? Are we taking away people's freedoms by asking them if they've had a vaccine or double vaxxed, or, you know,
so the guidance that I provided is that we shouldn't do that for worship, and that we're restricted from that, or, you know, that excluded from the vaccine passport expressly by the province. So we shouldn't do that for worship, but we do need to do that for small group meetings, like board meetings and things like that.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. No problem. Catherine.
I apologize if this was covered because I was coming and going and picking up children, but renter groups, like, if we're opening the building to renter groups, because we have a bunch of them asking, you're shaking your head, just no. Oh.
No, I just have the tremor. I'm not.
Oh, okay, sorry. Like you're like, no.
No.
If we do decide that we're going to open up, can we say to them, look, you folks need to do your due diligence. You need to make sure everyone's masked and everyone's vaccinated, or whatever it is for your small group, and then show us proof of it? Or do we need to kind of monitor what's going on with the groups who are using the building?
The groups that are using the building, like if they're renters, they're responsible for their own oversight of their own programs. So, you know, what you tell them is the expectation is they'll follow the provincial mandates, and then from there, we will. You know, if there's a problem, you can report them to the health authority or whatever, but you don't have to police that yourself.
Okay.
You just need to tell them, and they need to agree to follow the provincial guidelines if you're going to rent the space to them.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
No problem. Kelty?
Hi, I think you covered this with Joshua, but I missed part of it. And that's simply for those of us who are leading worship. I'm assuming that the region it would recommend that we can not wear the mask while we're leading, but I thought better to double check so I can speak with authority.
You don't have to wear it when you're leading as long as you're far enough away.
Okay, that's what I was assuming, but I just needed to hear it from your mouth so I can say, Trina said.
Yeah, and Dr. Henry has said that as well, specifically. So yeah, I think you're pretty safe, but it's the distance thing that you have to pay attention to. And if you want to be really careful, a plexiglass barrier is also okay, that you can get, you know, from Staples or wherever, but you know, like they have in the stores, but certainly not masking as long as you're in distance is okay.
Right, and we've got at least 3 meters before the first pews. So.
Yeah, so you'd be fine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem. Val.
I can appreciate just how difficult this is for everybody, and including Dr. Henry, in trying to determine you know, I mean, even just defining worship, it's a pretty nuanced thing for a lot of people. And there is that sort of traditional description of what worship is. But I'm curious to know, Trina, if there are other leaders in the community of faith arena and in sort of these higher positions like you're in that are interested in lobbying for not being exempt. I mean, having been exempted has really made this a lot more work than it would have been, right? Like you think, oh, you're lucky, you don't fall under all those rules, but wow, has it ever made it complicating?
Yeah, it is, and it's surprising that the majority of the senior faith leaders that have been gathering would not support that request. They were always wanting exemptions from everything all along. And there was huge amount of pressure on them from many of the different faiths. So I wouldn't get, a lot of traction in that group with that. And it may be that the national church moves on this, and that then we can, then we'll have their legal backup to say we're going to require vaccine passports. But they're all still on holidays. So,
yeah. And sadly, what it might be is there's going to be an outbreak somewhere. And then it's going to be backtracking and saying, well, okay, now we need to have those rules apply everywhere, including in communities of faith. So
yeah, and like Dr. Henry has a lot of faith in the vaccines, and she's really clear that she doesn't want to get back into the widespread provincial restrictions that we had before, and so she's going to resist that really hard all along, because she really feels that we need to deal with the outbreaks as they happen in the location that they happen, rather than saying, okay, well, but it does seem to be getting a little out of hand. And so her I guess she's just being proactive, but it's not, I mean, like we're nowhere near the flu season. We're still in the low transmission time, right? So it is starting to look like we're looking, we may end up in lockdown again, but certainly in the immediate term. I mean, what they're trying to do is force people to get vaccinated. Like they're putting the vaccine passports in place so that your life is so restricted when you're not vaccinated that you're going to go and get vaccinated. Because all of the conversations that they're having with us is, what role can the faith communities play in encouraging people to be vaccinated? And so that's the piece that is really, I think, where they're really trying to go with all of this. Peter.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
I just wanted to share something, Trina, that might be relevant to some of the messaging or even this conversation. But I'm tired. But when I stop and think about where I was or where we were a year ago, I feel so very fortunate. I mean, to have a vaccine developed, to have effective vaccine and therapeutic treatments for when people are sick. Like, we are so far ahead of where we were last year. Like, there are blessings in that. And my goodness, we have access to vaccines that most people in the world would love to have, right? What I think is really hard here is it's natural for us to want to get certainty from rules. And the reality is if we think of polio, typhoid, you pick your virus, right? Your epidemic. There isn't certainty, and so it's as people of faith, there's got to be something in there that's really core to who we are about leaning into uncertainty.
Yeah,
right? And not being afraid. I read something today which I thought was kind of a bit of it's a kind of a metaphor, which was, we want to reach for a hammer to whack the virus, right? Instead of learning new dance steps, because the reality is you dance with uncertainty, right? I mean, so, Anyway, sorry. I just feel actually I have to remind myself that I'm truly blessed to be here today.
Thank you. Well, I'm also, I mean, in some ways, I'm kind of excited by the fact that the government is saying worship is non-discretionary, right? I mean, that's kind of what Cheryl is saying. And the amount of time that Dr. Henry has spent talking to us as faith leaders and taken the need for spiritual community seriously as part of the consideration of the public health needs. I mean, you know, isn't that amazing? You know, I just like, that's been one of the greatest gifts to me in this whole thing. Philip.
Hi, Trina. Thanks for your time and wisdom today. My question has to do around the guidance we're offering to rental groups, community groups that have started in the building. They're all wondering, how do they be safe? And we've been thinking in terms of the church building as having private spaces and public spaces. And if a chess camp, you know, moves masks through the corridors and uses washrooms or heads to the kitchen, they're masked. And then when they settle into their program in their room, it's their responsibility to do what they feel are comfortable and safe. And if that means their masks come off, then it comes off. Now, is that helpful guidance or is that misguided to think in terms of the spaces being used?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, with the provincial mask guideline, I mean, worship services are exempt, but theoretically small group meetings wouldn't be, regardless of the space that they're in. So I mean, however, what individuals do when they're locked in a room together is to a large extent up to them. But I think that the guidance that you as a church ought to give would be that they should be masked.
Okay, that's helpful, because there was pressure that, well, surely when we, you know, are off with just the several of us, we can relax. And it was like, well, we will know more on Wednesday.
I mean, you know, you're not going to go in every room policing the masks, right? So what they do, if, you know, they're among themselves and they make their own decisions, yes, that to a certain extent is up to them, but I wouldn't make that policy.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks. Sharon?
First, thank you. This is a confusing journey that we're all on together, and your presence and your calm, as has been said, is much appreciated. I've been thinking in terms of the space and the congregation and the user groups, and the fact that it's all the same space. Particularly now at Knox, because we have only our sanctuary, user groups will be sharing the same space that we are using. And so I think that it's helpful that they need to be masked and so on. But I also think that what we do in terms of our cleaning and our sanitizing and all of that protocol is ultimately very important as well. And so the policing of the groups can only happen to a certain level, and the protocols, the sanitizing protocols, is our responsibility then, and our carry through. And I'm wondering if that's a part of the conversation that's happening, and a reminder to groups is helpful. And
yeah, I would agree with that it's the group's responsibility to police themselves, and that it's your responsibility to ensure that proper cleaning happens. Yes. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's fair.
Thank you.
Yeah. Carrie.
Hi, Trina. Thanks for today. It's really a complicated time, so it's very helpful to just be hearing what's happening from in different places, and hearing your overall take on it. So I wanted to say thank you, first of all. I also, in the document that Trina sent out, I'm sorry, Tressa. Sorry, Tressa. Tressa sent out the guidance for holding low-risk worship services. There's a line in there in the introduction, third paragraph, and it says local or regional public health orders that apply to worship services may be placed during times of increased community spread of COVID-19 and or within communities with low vaccination uptake. These orders take precedence over the guidance provided here. And I'm just wondering, because we do have a different public health order in interior health. Anyway, I'm just wondering if
yeah, I inquired specifically about the interior health order, and I received an email back with confirmation. Well, her answer is, thank you for your question. I connected with the public health office and they confirmed that the interior health order does not apply to worship services.
Okay. Wow. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Joanne.
Thank you. And thanks, Trina, for this. Really appreciate your guidance. Just my question is just that, so as I understand it, this is for indoor activities. So if you were having a small group activity outside.
Yes, that's right.
You wouldn't need to do the vaccine passport or the mask.
No.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, this is all indoor. Yeah. And I just put a note in the chat. I mean, again, these are minimums. So, you know, you can decide to comply with that interior health order, even though we've been given an exemption, right? You can just say, this is an order. Nobody's going to question that, right? And so, yeah. And it hasn't been widely advertised that we're exempted. Well, did we do it? We answered all the questions? That's exciting.
Yes, you're very good, Trina.
Thank you.
Very much. Jackie and the Suyas, and you take very good care of yourself.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Trina.
Thank you. Well, thanks, everybody.